Hi, it's Alison again, back in the masterclass kitchen. Today I'm going to do one of my favourite things, sauces. When I was a junior chef and I was growing up through the trade from the age of 16 right through into my early 20s, I worked in London, some of the top restaurants and hotels, and I loved being the saucier chef. We were like the stars, the superstars of the kitchen. We didn't just spend our lives making just stocks and sauces. We were in charge of like the main courses, the glamour part, and I loved the basic sauces. I was taught to make a roux sauce by Michel and Albert Roux at Westminster Hotel School in London. And if you're going to argue with them about that, then you may as well shut up, because they knew everything about the sauce and how to make it. So I know there's lots and lots of different ways out there of making a sauce, a roux sauce, and thickening a sauce. I'm going to show you the classic way. I'm not going to argue that it's the only way, but I'm going to show you it's the only way I like to see you do it when you're at ice with me. So I'm going to make a roux, and for those of you already saying or nodding your heads that you've heard of a roux before, you would know that a roux is a thickening paste. A roux is a fat and a flour that's combined together over heat. There's one exception to that, which I will go into a little bit later. The first roux we're going to make today is known as a white roux or a roux blanc. Roux meaning the thickening paste, blanc meaning white in French. Roux blanc is a white roux. So I'm going to use butter for this one. Now you will argue that butter's yellow, and our roux in Australia is very, very yellow compared to the roux that I used to make in England and in France, where you might notice that the butter is white. If you go on to France on holiday, you get breakfast, you get white butter, and the difference is the colouring that's put in it here. So if you think butter's made from milk and cream and that's white, right? Well, it's yellow. So the roux is not going to be that white. But let's think of it as the first stage of cooking, which means white, okay? So we're going to take equal quantities of butter, 50 grams of butter, 50 grams of plain flour, and a litre of hot milk. It's going to make what we call a bechamel. Bechamel or white sauce, basically it's the sauce that holds the lasagnas together. It's the sauce that you add cheese to for mac and cheese. It's the sauce that you add parsley and lemon to over poached fish. It's that white base sauce, and I'm going to show you how to make it from scratch. Got a pan on my induction here. Just going to make a little bit more heat on there. And I'm going to melt my butter. So one block of butter is going to be melted in one go. While that's happening, the liquid for any sauce is got to have flavour, maximum flavour. So if I make this sauce using butter, flour and milk, it's going to be pretty flat, right? It's going to be milky and buttery, but nothing else. Let's add some flavour to the liquid. Let's get as much flavour packed into that milk as we can. Now, when I was a junior chef, I was taught to make what we know as an onion cloute. The word cloute in English means studded, okay? So literally a bay leaf and a clove or two is going to stud the bay leaf to the clove and the bay leaf to the onion, and the clove is going to act like little drawing pins. I love doing this. It's really cool. This is pretty good when you don't want a clove that busts just like that one did, because it hurts your fingers. But this is called an onion cloute, otherwise known as a studded onion. I'll put that into a litre of milk, and in 5 hours' time, the flavour from this is going to infuse into the milk. I don't have time for that today. You don't have time to watch it because it's boring. I'm going to show you a quicker way of infusing flavour into the milk. We are going to take the same onion, we're going to slice it down, and we're going to add it in slices. Take our bay leaf and our cloves, and we're going to do what we call infused aromatic milk. That milk is hot. What I really would have loved to have done is put the onions, the cloves and the bay leaves in first, bring it to temperature, turn it off before it boils over. Otherwise you've got to clean the stove. We've all done it before. When you think it's about ready, it's ready. When you turn your back, it's going to boil over, and it's so hard. I nearly swore then, but I hold myself back. Put the lid on, push it off the flame and let it sit for like 20 minutes. It will give you so much flavour. Now, we're not going to put that into our roux or our sauce, because then we'll have cloves and bay leaves in our sauce. We're going to allow that to infuse. Then we're going to strain the milk. At all times, you want to keep the milk warm, above 80 degrees Celsius. And that's important, because I'll explain why when we make the roux. All right, so imagine that you can smell through the lens of the camera. I can smell bay, I can smell clove, and I can smell onion. Not too much of each, because then it would over-intensify the flavour of the sauce. So the milk's been left to infuse. It's still warm to the touch. I'm going to pass it through a fine strainer, get rid of the onions, get rid of the bay, get rid of the cloves, but they've done their job. That milk now has this beautiful savoury smell. That bay is unbelievable. I wish we had some fresh ones, but I think I've picked too many off the tree here at Alison. As I go towards the tree, it shivers in fear. I'm going to shred just one leaf off it again, so we're going to let it grow a little bit more. But a dry one's okay once it comes to life. But that milk, lovely. It reminds me of a hotel on a chilly morning in London. We used to make these sauces all the time. I'll just get rid of the pan. All right, now I'm going to actually make the roux. So the butter, remember 50 grams of butter, 50 grams of flour. I love a very thin spoon, all right, because you want to get into the edges of your pan. So don't go with a little tiny pan and a thumping great big wooden spoon because you're going to end up with lumps. It's important, you'll see why. Flour in one go. This flour is just medium plain flour. There's nothing strong about it. It's not tipo, it's not high gluten, low. It's just general all-purpose flour. It really is for the purpose of just thickening with the starch. One go. All right, no mamby-pamby gradually. This is in one go. And you mix the butter and the flour together quickly, overheat, and you make a paste. So remember, see what I said about the small edges of the spoon? It gets into the cracks. Perfect. All right, so now this mixture resembles just like wet sand. So think of it, it's like wet sand. It's got a lovely buttery smell to it, but the flour's pretty raw. If I was to taste that now, I'd be like, it's gluey. So I was taught that a blonde roux takes anywhere between 3 and 5 minutes over a very gentle heat. So basically you're cooking out the floury taste, getting rid of that gluiness. You do not want this to colour. If you take this roux to the next stage, which I'm going to do next, it becomes a blonde roux or roux blonde with an E on the end. So you can say French, you know French, just blonde with an E on the end. Basically it means a fawn or beige roux. It makes a sauce called a veloute. So we have one roux, a white roux here, so roux blanc, and then we have a roux blonde, which is the next stage. If you overcook this one, you're going to colour this, and that's not what you want for the white sauce. Remember, we're using milk to make a white sauce here. So let me just let that cook out a little bit. Take your spoon out, you don't need to leave that in, and just on a gentle heat here, I'm on number 2 on my induction, but on a gas stove, you just be on a very low, moderate heat. Okay, my milk is here, and it's been flavoured, and it's now warm. Let me just push my board slightly closer because what I want to do is get that nice and safe. So I want to add the hot milk into the pan while it's on the stove. And there's reasons for this, and if you do it differently to this, then your sauce will end up as a different product at the end. I was taught that your roux and your liquid have to be slightly different temperatures. So if the roux is really hot, in other words, it's still on the stove, the milk can cool slightly. So you're not 100 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees. You've got to have slight difference because that way the milk or the liquid absorbs easier into the flour. Likewise, the milk could be boiling and you can take the roux off the stove and let it cool down. And if it's a big load of roux, you can turn it out of the pan into a cold bowl and let it cool down quicker. It's got to be around about 20, 30 degrees difference. Now the reason for that is that you want a shiny, smooth, great textured sauce. And you do that by the way that the liquid is absorbed. So another thing also here is that you don't want to add scalding hot liquid to a scalding hot roux because it burns quickly, sticks to the bottom of the pan and creates lumps. You don't want that, you want to slow things down. A good sauce is a slow sauce, if that makes sense. So anyone that tells you can make a cold roux by adding butter and flour together and whisking it into milk, cold milk, and then heating it up, that can make a bechamel, they are incorrect. That is making a white sauce, but it's not the sauce I'm making you today, all right? So let's do the basics first before we think about jumping ahead and doing other things. We can make a beurre manière, and basically that becomes a cold roux that you can whisk in to sauces and stews, but only if they're not thick enough after being made the traditional way. It's not something that you can just say, you don't need to do this. It's not to make a bechamel. It's not correct. It's a rectifying paste, a cold roux. Beurre manière or kneaded butter. All right, if you were here with me now, you'd smell this. This smells like shortbread biscuits. You know when you can smell biscuits cooking in the oven? That lovely sort of pastry smell, that's what a white roux smells like. Butter's cooked, flour's cooked, and the paste itself looks like it's wet sand, but it's hotter, exactly the same. Now what I ought to do is just pop that off the heat slightly, let it cool down for like maybe 2 or 3 minutes, so that when the milk goes in, I'm not scalding that. I do not want it to stick, I don't want lumps forming, I want a gradual absorption of the liquid so that it becomes shiny and glossy. All right, goes in. Now you notice there was a slight noise when that went in then, it wasn't a massive sizzle, and it was only one ladle at a time, right? Okay, I'm gonna pop the temperature up a little bit now, because I'm in control of the sauce. I want you to be in control of your sauce or your pan. Don't let the pan control you. In other words, if this is going bang, bang, oh my God, you're not in control, right? Look, I am. And look how quickly that thickens, and that's where your little spoon comes in really handy. Look, it's starting to make a sauce. And you can't really visualise the shine just yet, but I tell you what, when you see me making this sauce, you'll see it shining and glossy, because I'm doing this very slow process. So one ladle at a time, and you're going to ask me how much liquid that is. Well, you know what? Use your judgment, a small amount. You could even have it in a jug, and you'd be adding maybe 50 mils at a time, that's all. And again, we're doing this over heat, so this sauce is bubbling as it's thickening. So you're cooking this sauce on the way to being thick. You can see. Now I can control this with my beautiful thin spoon, and the fact that I've only added a small bit of liquid means I can stir those lumps through. I'm not chasing this, it's not going too quickly, it's just at the right speed for me to be in charge. And look, already the lumps are gone. Look, you don't need to use a whisk for a bechamel, and if you do, you've been taught the wrong way, literally. You don't need a whisk. Look, there's no whisk in sight, and there's also no lumps in sight, plus I've not even broken out into a sweat, because I'm doing it slowly. Basically, I'm also getting a really lovely shine on that sauce as well. So I'm ready. If you want to have a little peep inside here, it's really glossy, really shiny. Hopefully that's the shiniest bechamel you've seen today anyway. It's got a really good consistency, and there's no lumps. So we look for 5 quality points in the sauce. 1 is colour. This is white, yeah. 2 is texture, so there's no lumps. 3 is consistency, which I'll show you in a minute. 4 is shine, which is another thing I've been talking about, and 5 is flavour. We can't look for flavour, but they're 5 good things to remember. So remember, you've got colour, texture, consistency, shine, and flavour. The flavour's coming from the milk, the onions. Now, that's ready. I'm going to just turn it right down to keep it nice and warm, and I want to just show you, I talked about texture. What do you think a texture of a bechamel ought to be? Well, think about what you use it for. This is going to go over cauliflower and have cheese on the top. It's going to go in between layers of lasagna, so it's got to be quite thick, right? There's no point in it being runny like a jus or a coulis consistency. It's going to fall off the cauliflower. The piece of poached fish with the parsley sauce is going to fall off. It's got to be a coating consistency. So take the spoon and watch the back of it. Beautiful. Coating consistency at the back of that spoon, and it's shiny and absolutely beautiful. You can almost run your finger through, and it stays there for like 2 to 3 seconds. Perfect. Now, taste-wise, with any base sauce, this is one of the base sauces. Some people will say it was a master sauce. Some people say it's a mother sauce. We call it a base sauce, and there's several base sauces that you will learn when you come to ice. This is the #1 base sauce that we teach, a bechamel. Bechamel being white sauce with a white roux. We do not season this yet. You think, why not? Think about it. This is a base. We're going to make derivative sauces. Sometimes people call them small sauces from this. We're going to add some stuff to this to make our cheese sauce for Mornay. We're going to add cream and parsley for our parsley sauce. We're going to add some braised onions for a sauce oignon or onion sauce. This is a master sauce. Now, if the bechamel is being used as a sauce to layer lasagna or to mix macaroni, sure, you can season it. But the rule in the old kitchen system I worked in was that you never flavoured a base stock or a base sauce, so that everybody around the world knew a bechamel in the fridge was unseasoned. Now, if you are going to season this, you're going to use some salt and white ground pepper only. If you're going to put black pepper in there, you're going to see it. It's not cool. Ground white pepper. Remember, we're in France right now. This is a French sauce, a French classic. The French did not use ground black pepper. They used ground white pepper. That's the way the sauce is seasoned. All right, take it off the heat. Now, how to store a bechamel. If you're not using that now, we're going to pour that into a suitable container. And the best way I can teach you how to store a sauce if you're keeping it warm for service is by popping in a couple of lumps of butter on the top of the sauce and a round cartouche, so a round piece of baking paper on the top. Put butter on there first, stops the sauce from sticking when you pull the lid off. You don't take half the sauce with it. If you're lucky enough to have a bain-marie at your workplace, pour it straight into a wet bain-marie container over water, put a lid on. I still go with the butter and I still go with the grease-proof lid. I would cool that down in small containers if it was going in the fridge overnight, wait for it to get cold, put a lid on, label, date in the fridge, and this sauce really freezes well as well. You can freeze this for up to 3 months. In the fridge, I'd keep it up to 3 or 4 days. That's the bechamel, that's the first sauce, guys. Okay, now we're going to make our second sauce today. We've just done our bechamel, and we've seen that beautiful white, milk-infused, creamy sauce. Can be used for a variety of things, as we said, so macaroni cheeses, lasagnas, moussakas, croque monsieurs, over fish, over potato bake, whatever you want to use it for. It's really cool. Next one is called a veloute, and if any of you can speak French, luckily I can, so that was easy for me. The word veloute actually means velvet. So think of a velvet texture, lovely plush, shiny velvet texture. That's what we're going to try and achieve with this sauce. Same thing again, 50 grams of butter, 50 grams of flour will thicken 1 litre of a liquid. This time the liquid is a stock, because it's a blonde sauce, yeah? Now we can make a stock, use a stock that's a white beef stock, white veal stock, white beef stock, white chicken stock, white fish stock, and even a white vegetable stock. Entirely up to you, but depending on what it's being made for. Today I'm going to use a white chicken stock, which is full flavoured. It's been reduced down a little bit, so you can get extra flavour in. And today we were lucky enough to have Davey Pugh in our masterclass kitchen as well. He gave me a great idea that I hadn't thought of before, using some rendered chicken fat in place of some of the butter. So I've got 25 grams of butter, 25 grams of chicken fat in here. I'm going to make a really good chicken flavoured sauce. Now, vegetarians aren't going to be very happy with me. Well, hopefully lacto-vegetarians will be eating this, because it would be made with a vegetable stock, so you wouldn't want to put chicken fat in it, getting confused. So let's just stick to the traditional butter and flour. Equal quantities, again, just like the bechamel. We're going to melt the butter in one go, add the flour just straight in one go, and it's going to be lowered the heat so it doesn't burn, and mixed together exactly like before. You can rewind this bit, guys, because it's exactly the same. In fact, I could make a white roux again with exactly the same ingredients, same pan, same equipment. What do you think is going to make this different to the one that you saw before in the bechamel? Have a think. Bearing in mind I'm using this liquid to make an ivory, velvety kind of sauce. This is going to be cooked longer. And the longer I cook this, the more colour will develop in the roux. So this roux is known as a blonde roux, fawn or beige. My mum used to use the word fawn. Don't usually use that word these days for colour, but beige would be a good one, or blonde. So what we're doing now, when you look at this, it looks like wet sand, just like before. Smells a bit like shortbread, just like before. We're going to leave this on a low flame for 5 to 7 minutes. Bechamel was 3 to 5 minutes. So if you think 4 minutes for a bechamel, 6 minutes for a veloute, it's a good way to remember it. But it depends on the heat. If you've got a roaring gas flame under here, you're not going to need 6 minutes. You're going to burn that. This is on induction number 2, which is really low. The gas flame would be really low, gentle. It's not sizzling, it's not burning, it's colouring. Now, from a scientific point of view, don't suppose you know this. If you do, you're smarter than me, because I only learnt this recently. If you cook a roux too long, the flour weakens and weakens and weakens, and therefore doesn't thicken and thicken and thicken like it does if it's not overcooked. So the longer you cook a roux, the weaker the flour is for thickening. Now, that might tell you a clue about the actual consistency of a veloute. Remember the bechamel we just saw? A nice thick coating consistency? Well, we're going to cook the flour longer, so what do you think is going to happen to the consistency? Same amount of liquid. Think about it. This flour is going to cook longer, it's going to be weaker, so when the liquid goes in, it's going to produce a thinner sauce. We are looking for a pouring consistency. Think of like a jus, like a gravy. It's ivory, a flowing sauce, pouring sauce. So the roux is going to cook longer. And yes, we're using a thinner liquid. You can argue that. Milk's a little thicker in density, but not too bad. Not too much difference. The same amount of roux. The only difference is the liquid that we use to make the veloute and how long we cook the roux for. Okay, I'm going to show you how to make a cartouche. A cartouche is a paper temporary lid. It's a round piece of paper, usually silicone or greaseproof paper, baking paper. It's a temporary lid. It's cool to put over stocks in the fridge or the storeroom. The ability to write on it about what the stock is, when it was made, who made it, and a date. Temporary lid that you can write on, pretty cool. It stops things falling in to liquids in the fridge, like soups, for example. And in this instance, we're going to use the cartouche to put over our veloute, because a veloute is often finished off in the oven. This stops the sauce from burning, stops it from colouring at the top. Take a square piece of paper. Now watch this carefully, I'll only do this once. Fold the paper into half, point to point, yeah? So keep that long point towards you. Then turn it away from you and fold half to half again. So you're going from a right angled triangle to like an isosceles triangle. That point there, you're going to fold over again. Don't even move it, you're going to fold again, in, got it? And again in. Now, if you think about it, that's the centre of your circle, that's the outside of your circle. Now, how big do you make a cartouche? Could be a tiny little bechamel you want to keep warm, could be a hollandaise, could be a massive great stock pot. You've got to decide what it's for. Okay, I want this to be exactly the right width for this pan. Remember, this is a circle. So this is the middle of the circle and this is the circumference. So radius is the outside, the middle of the circle, and we're going to cut this. Now, I want to measure from the centre of this pan to the outside. If I want this to overlap, then I'm going to cut it bigger, right? If I want it to go right inside the pan, I'm going to cut it exactly the same width as the pan itself. Now, you can cut with a knife. You can also snip with scissors. If you've done this wrong, it's about now that you scream because you open it and you've only got half a circle. That's the circle cartouche that you need to pop down on the top of this sauce. Or, before we said about the bechamel, knobs of butter on top of a sauce, put a cartouche down, it stops the skin from forming, and it's an excellent way of keeping a sauce from, I guess, getting cold, and also in the fridge from stopping things falling down. That's a classic cartouche. Back to my blonde roux. You can see there's a colour change here. I'm sure Matt's going to come in with his camera and see. There's been a colour change. It's gone to like a beige colour. It's more of a pastry colour. It's difficult because we're using yellow butter, I know, but believe me, that is different. And the smell now smells like roasted nuts. So think about macadamias or almonds in the oven. That smell kind of smells a little bit like that. It's still like biscuits, I'll be honest with you. But it's the colour changing. In fact, it's actually getting a little darker in colour, but it's still got a couple more minutes to go, so we'll just come back to that in a sec. This is only a small amount, but I still want to show you that technique because it's important. All right, so I'm going to add my ladle of stock. And again, you hear a small sizzle. I'm in control of this, not like the scalding hot pan where I just can't stir in quickly enough. I don't want lumps to form. And I'm using a very small, thin spoon to get into the corners. So you notice the difference in colour straight away. Yeah, I'm using stock, I know that, but it's different, completely different. But again, we can't wait for a bubble here because it's very thick. So I am going to go in with another ladle of stock. As soon as it gets saucy, not saucy as in sexy, I meant saucy as in liquid-like, you can wait for the bubbles before you add the next amount of liquid. That shows you the sauce has come up to temperature, okay? So next time I'm going to wait for the bubbles, and this sauce is shining so much, it's like, wow, it's so cool. It's velvet, remember? Veloute meaning velvet. It's got a really deep shine to it, and no lumps, so the texture's good. You can probably see there. Texture's awesome. And at the moment, if I waited for bubbles, I might just see plop, plop. Yep, a little tiny one there, enough. I don't want it to burn the bottom. I just want to know that that's come up above 85 to 90 degrees Celsius, all right? Again, you want to do this quickly. Sometimes I know you can't. If you do it quickly, you end up coming back and having to sieve it or whisk those lumps out anyway. Do you know what? It takes longer than doing it this way. All right, make sure you go up the sides of the pan and grab all that flour and roux. You don't want any surprises at the end. You get this beautiful velvet smooth sauce and there's one lump that falls down and messes up the whole lot. You don't want that either. All right, so can you remember what we said about the consistency of this sauce? We said it was different. We said bechamel was to grab onto the food and to coat the food, to cover it. Often things are being grilled or baked, so it's got to be thick, right? What about this one? This is going to be a velvety, pouring, flowing sauce, okay? Already, look, and it's ivory, beige or fawn, whatever you want to call it. All right, now we put our last lot of stock in. We're going to have a bit of a taste of this one. No flour, such an intense chicken flavour from that stock. Great, brilliant. Let's pour some of this out into a container because I want to just show you the base veloute and the colour that we've got there, which is lovely. Can you see that shining, guys? Ooh, gorgeous, I love it. And it's a flowing coating consistency. So with our spoon, the other one that I licked, it's a pouring coating consistency, okay? Watch, this one, we need more flavour. Imagine it was a bigger amount, it's not just one little tiny bit. Put the blanch bones in, give it a little stir up. Cartouche, take a bit of butter, grease the lid of the cartouche, and I'll tell you why, when that cartouche goes butter side down, on top of that, doesn't stick too much. That goes into an oven with a lid on around about 170 degrees Celsius until that flavour is cooked out beautiful. Strain away the bones, finish with a bit of extra stock if it's too thick. Fantastic veloute sauce. This one, a couple of little knobs of butter on the top, stops that skin forming, and you can put a little bit of a square cartouche over that if you wish as well. That's your veloute, and that didn't take us very long to make at all, so I'm pretty happy with that. Thank you, Matt. You've got a little bit of a square cartouche there. Storage, I wait for it to get cold, lid on, in the fridge. That's the veloute sauce for you.